He learned he was a father, 3 years too late. And the strangest part wasn't the shock. It was that his life looked perfect when the truth finally found him. Gerald stood at the edge of a hospital hallway, expensive shoes planted on polished floors, phone buzzing endlessly in his pocket with messages from investors who believed he controlled everything. To the world, he was a man who rebuilt success from nothing. A millionaire again, respected, interviewed, admired. Yet in that moment, none of those titles mattered. Because somewhere across Atlanta, 2 small children already knew how to laugh, how to run, how to call someone mom. And he had never heard their voices before. Success had returned to him long before peace ever did. He owned a penthouse overlooking the city skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows, quiet mornings, ordered routines, the kind of life people envy without asking what silence sounds like when no one shares it with you. He used to believe loneliness was the price of ambition. He was wrong. The truth was simpler and harder. He hadn't lost love because it failed. He lost it because he walked away while still believing he was protecting it. And now, years later, life was preparing to place him face to face with the consequence of that decision, whether he was ready or not. Gerald didn't know it yet, but the next ordinary morning would introduce him to the 2 people who carried his eyes, his expressions, and a history he never knew existed. A little girl who laughed, without hesitation, a little boy who watched the world carefully before trusting it. His children, the family he never chose to leave, but left all the same. And the woman he once loved, the woman he believed had moved on, had been carrying a story far heavier than silence. Because while Gerald was rebuilding his fortune, Emily was rebuilding life itself, and neither of them understood yet that love doesn't disappear when people separate. Sometimes it waits, quietly, patiently, until the moment truth arrives and asks a question no one can avoid. What do you do when the life you thought ended never actually stopped? He built an empire after losing his marriage, only to discover the family he thought was gone had been growing without him. People would later argue about Gerald's story. Some would say he deserved the shock. Others would insist life had simply been unfair to both of them. And a few, the quiet thinkers, would ask the harder question nobody says out loud. How do 2 people who truly loved each other end up living separate lives filled with the same regret? Because from the outside, Gerald looked like proof that perseverance always wins. Business magazines praised his comeback. Investors called him disciplined. Friends described him as focused. But success has a way of hiding unfinished chapters. Every achievement added another layer between him and the memory he avoided revisiting. Late-night conversations in a small Atlanta apartment, laughter over burnt dinners, music playing while someone danced barefoot across the kitchen floor. Emily. Her name rarely left his thoughts, even when he pretended it had. He told himself their separation had been necessary, logical, responsible even. Back then his company was collapsing, pressure closing in from every direction. He believed distance would shield her from uncertainty. That was the story he repeated whenever guilt tried to speak. And for years it almost worked, until one ordinary Saturday morning rewrote everything he believed about his past. Because while Gerald was preparing to give a short speech at a community event, something polite, forgettable, another obligation squeezed between meetings, 2 small voices were laughing somewhere nearby. And those voices belonged to children who shared his blood, his timing, his history. Children he never abandoned intentionally, children he never even knew existed. When people hear stories like this, judgment comes quickly. Some will say Emily should have told him immediately. Others will say Gerald should have fought harder for the marriage before walking away. Everyone becomes wise after the outcome is known. But real life rarely gives people clarity while they are living inside confusion. Back then, both of them believed they were making the least harmful choice. Back then, love wasn't missing, understanding was. And now, years later, truth was preparing to step into the open, not gently, not gradually, but all at once. Because the next time Gerald saw Emily, she wouldn't be alone, and neither of them would be the same people who said goodbye. So let me ask you something. Quietly, honestly, no judgment, no quick answers, not ended, not forgotten, just lived somewhere else while you kept moving forward. Because stories like this don't begin with villains, they begin with ordinary people trying to survive difficult seasons the best way they know how. A man believed he was protecting the woman he loved by stepping away during the hardest chapter of his life. Years later, he would learn that the very silence meant to shield her became the distance that changed everything. Most people understand that feeling, saying the wrong thing while exhausted, choosing space instead of conversation, assuming there will always be time later to explain what you meant. Haven't we all trusted tomorrow a little too easily? Here's the real problem. Pride and fear often sound reasonable when we're hurting. Gerald thought success would fix the emptiness he felt. Emily believed strength meant handling life alone. neither realized that silence was slowly writing a future neither of them would have chosen. So what happens when life brings those two paths back together? When the person you once loved stands in front of you, carrying proof that your past never truly closed? Because this story isn't only about discovering children, it's about discovering consequences, forgiveness, and whether love can recognize itself after years of living apart. And somewhere in Atlanta, on a warm morning that felt completely ordinary, fate was already moving quietly toward a moment that would force two hearts to answer a question neither had prepared for. Can a family begin again, after time has already taken its share? But wait, this isn't the kind of story where everything changes in a dramatic instant. No thunder, no warning speech, no moment where music swells and life announces what's coming next. Instead, the turning point arrived disguised as something painfully normal. A weekend obligation Gerald almost canceled, a community event, a short appearance, a handshake or two before heading back to work. Nothing important, or so he believed, because real life rarely signals the moments that divide before from after. 1 minute you're checking your watch, thinking about emails waiting for replies. The next, a sound reaches you that doesn't belong to your carefully controlled world. Children laughing, not polite laughter, not restrained, the kind that bursts out freely, loud, fearless, alive. And for reasons Gerald couldn't explain, that sound made him stop walking, just stop. Something inside him paused before his mind understood why. He turned slightly, eyes searching across the park, drawn by instinct more than curiosity. Two small figures ran through floating bubbles near the playground, one chasing joy without hesitation, the other moving carefully, protecting a toy truck like it carried responsibility far bigger than his tiny hands. Gerald smiled without realizing it, a simple moment, a passing glance. Yet something about them felt familiar in a way that didn't make sense, not recognition exactly, more like memory knocking before being invited in. And within seconds, without a single dramatic announcement, Gerald was about to look up and see a face he had spent years trying not to search for in crowds, a face connected to every quiet regret he never fully admitted. Emily. The moment hadn't happened yet, but it was already unavoidable. And here's the part that keeps people watching stories like this until the very end. Gerald believed he was attending an event to support a community. He didn't realize he was walking directly toward the life that had been waiting for him all along. Love rarely ends with a loud goodbye. Most times, it fades into silence while both people still care more than they know how to say. That was the truth neither Gerald nor Emily understood when they walked away from each other years earlier. They didn't separate because love disappeared. They separated because fear spoke louder than honesty. Gerald feared failure, feared becoming a man who dragged the person he loved into uncertainty and loss. So he chose distance, convincing himself sacrifice looked like strength. Emily feared becoming unwanted, feared standing beside someone whose world seemed to shrink every time pressure grew heavier. So she chose dignity, convincing herself letting go looked like self-respect. Two good intentions, one painful outcome, and life, in its quiet wisdom, allowed both of them to live long enough to feel what those decisions truly cost. Because while Gerald rebuilt wealth, Emily rebuilt mornings, sleepless nights, tiny hands reaching for comfort, laughter echoing through small rooms filled more with love than security. He measured time in business quarters and investment returns. She measured time in first words, first steps, and whispered promises spoken to children who carried half of his story. Neither life was wrong, but neither life was complete. And here's the part people often misunderstand about second chances. They do not arrive to reward perfection. They arrive to test growth. The moment Gerald was about to experience wasn't punishment. It wasn't coincidence either. It was confrontation, the kind life delivers when unfinished love refuses to remain buried. Soon, he would stand face to face with the woman who once knew him before success defined him, and unknowingly stand before the proof that love had continued living even after he believed it ended. Because sometimes the deepest question isn't whether love survives, it's whether the people involved grow enough to recognize it when it returns. Welcome back to Mr. Dave Stories, where every story reminds us that growth is possible, healing is real, and lessons are everywhere. If this is your first time here, we're honored to have you. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story that might uplift, inspire, or change the way you see life. Now, before we continue, take a second with me. If you believe people deserve second chances when they truly grow, go ahead and like this video. And in the comments, tell me honestly, do you think silence can break a relationship faster than betrayal? Your voice matters here because stories like this aren't just told, they're felt together. Tonight's story begins in Atlanta, Georgia, a city that moves with rhythm and ambition at the same time. Glass towers rising beside neighborhoods filled with history, Sunday church songs echoing not far from late-night traffic, lives crossing paths every day without realizing how deeply they may change one another. years before a hospital hallway and a truth that would shake everything. There was simply a woman named Emily tying an apron inside a small coffee shop on Edgewood Avenue. She didn't know she was about to meet the man who would change her life, and he didn't know he was walking toward a love that would one day teach him the hardest lesson he would ever learn. Leaving someone doesn't always mean the story ends. Sometimes, it just means the real story hasn't started yet. Let's go back before the silence. Atlanta didn't wake up slowly. It arrived all at once, engines humming along the freeway before sunrise, the distant rhythm of bass drifting from passing cars, food vendors lifting metal shutters while the sky still carried traces of night. Somewhere across the city, church bells rang early, folding faith into the sound of traffic and ambition. And on Edgewood Avenue, inside a modest coffee shop wedged between a barbershop and a small clothing store, Emily tied her apron and smiled at a joke she had already heard twice that morning. She was 27 then, young enough to believe effort could shape the future, old enough to understand life rarely followed neat plans. "Girl, you always smiling this early," her coworker said from behind the counter. Emily shrugged lightly. "Morning ain't done nothing to me yet." The answer earned a laugh, the easy kind shared between people who worked long hours together and understood exhaustion without needing explanation. Emily moved through the cafe with practiced rhythm, wiping tables, greeting regulars by name, remembering orders before customers spoke them. A construction worker received his extra sugar without asking. An elderly woman near the window got her tea exactly the way she liked it, 2 lemon slices, never one. Small details mattered to Emily, not because the job required it, because people did. She grew up on Atlanta's southwest side, in a neighborhood where doors stayed open longer than schedules allowed and everybody's business somehow became community responsibility. Sundays meant pressed clothes, loud laughter, church hats that carried personality of their own, and aunties who corrected you with love disguised as firmness. Her grandmother used to tell her, "Baby, patience don't mean waiting. It means trusting your heart while life figures itself out." Emily carried that sentence everywhere. Even here, especially here. The cafe wasn't her final destination. It was a step, one of 2 jobs she worked while saving quietly for a dream she rarely announced out loud. In the evenings, after long shifts and tired feet, she helped organize youth programs at a local community center, art nights, homework support, open mic evenings where teenagers learned their voices mattered. She wanted to build something lasting someday, a cultural art space for kids who needed somewhere safe between school and home. Not glamorous, not profitable, but meaningful. And meaning, to Emily, felt richer than comfort. Outside, Atlanta continued moving, suits rushing toward downtown offices, delivery trucks blocking narrow streets, music blending generations together. The city carried contradictions, naturally. Old brick buildings beside modern glass towers, soul food restaurants standing proud across from sleek investment firms. 2 Americas learning to exist side by side. Emily understood one of them deeply, the other, she would meet soon enough. Mid-morning sunlight filtered through the cafe windows as the rush slowed. She wiped the counter, humming softly along to an old R&B song playing overhead. That was when the door opened, not dramatically, just a quiet chime. Emily didn't look immediately. New customers came and went constantly, but something about the pause that followed made her glance up. A man stood near the entrance studying the menu board, like he had wandered into unfamiliar territory. He looked polished, tailored suit, clean posture, watch catching light every time he moved his wrist. The kind of presence that belonged in boardrooms, not neighborhood cafes filled with local chatter and mismatched chairs. Yet he didn't look confident. He looked unsure, like someone accustomed to control suddenly realizing he didn't know the rules of the room. Emily noticed hesitation before appearance. It was something she had learned growing up. Confidence and comfort weren't the same thing. He stepped forward slowly, scanning options as if each one required careful evaluation. Behind him, a group of regulars laughed loudly about last night's basketball game. Someone called out greetings across the shop. Life moved naturally around him while he remained slightly disconnected from it. Emily dried her hands and approached. "First time here?" she asked gently. He blinked, surprised she noticed. "Is it that obvious?" Her smile came easily. Only people new read the menu like it's a contract. For a second he seemed unsure whether to laugh. Then he did, a real laugh, unexpected even to himself. And something shifted in the air. Not romance, not destiny, just relief. Relief that someone spoke to him without expectation attached. "I'll take whatever you recommend," he said. Emily tilted her head playfully. "That's a lot of trust for a stranger." He hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe I needed a break from making decisions." She recognized exhaustion hiding beneath professionalism. "All right," she said. "Then today you're getting the house favorite." As she prepared the drink, she noticed him observing the cafe. The conversations, the music, the easy familiarity between strangers. People greeted each other without formality. A man held the door open for someone he didn't know. Someone else offered half a muffin to a child waiting impatiently. Community without announcement. When she handed him the cup, he looked genuinely grateful. "Thank you, Emily, Gerald," he replied. The names settled quietly between them. Neither understood yet how important introductions sometimes become. Gerald took a sip and paused, surprised. "Okay, this is actually really good," Emily laughed. "You sound shocked." "I am," he admitted. "Most places near my office taste expensive but not better." She leaned slightly against the counter. "That's because this place isn't trying to impress anybody." He considered that longer than expected. Outside, traffic rolled forward. Inside, conversations continued. But for a brief moment, Gerald seemed still, as if he had stepped outside his usual pace. "What brings you down here?" Emily asked casually. "Work," he said automatically, then corrected himself. "Real estate development." She nodded politely, not impressed or intimidated. "Just listening." And Gerald noticed something unfamiliar. She wasn't measuring his worth through his job title. He found himself asking questions he didn't normally ask strangers. "How long have you worked here?" "A while," she said. "Long enough to know everybody's coffee order, and you like it?" She shrugged thoughtfully. "I like people. This lets me see them." The answer lingered, because Gerald spent most of his days discussing numbers, properties, projections, conversations about growth without connection. Here someone spoke about presence instead of progress. He glanced around again, noticing laughter he hadn't experienced in months, maybe years. For reasons he couldn't explain, he stayed longer than planned. One conversation turned into another, small jokes, easy pauses that didn't feel awkward. Eventually his phone buzzed repeatedly, pulling him back toward responsibility. He checked the screen reluctantly. "I should go," he said, almost apologetically. Emily nodded. "City waits for nobody." He smiled faintly. "Seems like this place does." As he walked toward the door, he hesitated. "I'll probably come back," he said. Emily shrugged lightly, hiding amusement. "We'll be here." The bell chimed again as he left. Emily returned to wiping the counter, unaware that her ordinary morning had just intersected with a life far different from her own. Across the street, Gerald paused before entering his car. For the first time that day, he wasn't thinking about contracts or investors. He was thinking about a coffee shop where conversations felt real. And a woman who spoke to him like success didn't matter. He didn't know why that stayed with him. He only knew he planned to return tomorrow. And sometimes, the smallest decisions, walking into a cafe, choosing conversation over routine, begin stories powerful enough to change entire futures. Because before love becomes complicated, it usually begins simply, with curiosity. Gerald returned the next morning, earlier than necessary. He told himself it was convenience. The cafe sat closer to a development site he planned to visit later. That explanation sounded reasonable enough as he parked along Edgewood Avenue, adjusting his jacket before stepping out into the warm Atlanta air. But honesty lived somewhere quieter inside him. He wanted another conversation that didn't feel like negotiation. The bell chimed as he entered. Emily glanced up immediately, recognition lighting her expression before either of them spoke. "Well," she said, smiling. "Contract reader came back." Gerald laughed, surprised by how easily the sound escaped him. "I figured I should confirm yesterday wasn't a fluke." She nodded toward the counter. "Same recommendation, or are you feeling adventurous today?" "Let's not rush growth," he replied. Wise decision. Their exchange felt natural, like picking up a conversation paused only moments ago instead of a full day. Around them, the cafe carried its usual rhythm. A group of college students debated music near the window. Someone played old-school hip-hop softly through a speaker behind the counter. A man in work boots greeted Emily with a handshake before grabbing his usual order without asking. Gerald noticed how effortlessly she moved between people, not performing kindness, living it. "You know everyone here," he observed as she handed him his coffee. "Most of them," she said. "Neighborhood runs on familiarity." "That sounds nice." She tilted her head slightly. "You say that like it's rare." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "Where I work, people know each other's positions more than they know each other." Emily nodded slowly, understanding more than he expected. "What's that like?" she asked. He considered the question carefully. Few people asked him about experience rather than success. "Efficient," he said finally. "Predictable. Everyone polite, but careful. Careful how? Like conversations are investments. You say what benefits you long term." Emily laughed softly. "That sounds exhausting." "It is," he admitted. She leaned against the counter, lowering her voice slightly. "Here, people just talk, sometimes too much." Right on cue, a loud argument erupted near the door about last night's basketball game. Emily gestured toward them. Example. Gerald watched the exchange. Animated voices, exaggerated gestures, laughter breaking tension seconds later. No one worried about appearances. Disagreement didn't threaten belonging. It fascinated him. You grew up around here? He asked. Southwest Atlanta, she said proudly. Big family, bigger opinions. He smiled. I can tell. What about you? She asked. Gerald hesitated again. His world always required careful summaries, private schools, structured expectations, conversations about achievement, long before adulthood arrived. Mostly suburbs, he said. Everything organized. Quiet. Emily nodded thoughtfully. Quiet ain't always peaceful. The statement lingered. Gerald realized she wasn't judging him, just noticing differences without assigning value to them. That felt new. A woman entered carrying a tray of homemade pastries, greeting Emily warmly before setting them on the counter. My aunt, Emily explained after she left. She checks on me more than my landlord does. Gerald chuckled. Community surveillance. Exactly, Emily said. You can't struggle quietly where I'm from. Somebody gonna notice. He looked down at his coffee. I think I've been struggling, quietly for years, he admitted before realizing he said it out loud. Emily didn't rush to respond. She simply nodded, giving the moment space. That happens, she said gently. People get busy surviving and forget to live. Her words landed deeper than motivational speeches he'd heard at conferences. His phone buzzed again. Emails, reminders, urgency demanding attention. He silenced it. Emily raised an eyebrow. That looked important. It can wait. The admission surprised even him. They talked longer that morning. About music, favorite food spots, Atlanta traffic complaints everyone shared regardless of background. Emily teased him for never riding MARTA. Gerald admitted he barely knew half the neighborhoods beyond development maps. You see Atlanta from boardrooms, she said. You gotta see it from sidewalks. Maybe I need a tour guide, he replied. She laughed. Careful what you ask for. Outside, sunlight strengthened, warming the street. Inside, Gerald felt something unfamiliar settling into place. Ease, not excitement, not attraction yet, comfort. And comfort, he realized, had been missing from his life longer than he wanted to admit. Over the next week, returning to the cafe became routine. Some mornings they spoke only briefly. Other days conversations stretched until coworkers teased Emily about her VIP customer. Gerald learned she worked evenings at a community center organizing youth programs. You do 2 jobs? He asked one afternoon. She shrugged. Dream's expensive. What kind of dream? Emily hesitated, almost dismissing the question before answering honestly. I want to open an art space someday, somewhere kids can create instead of getting into trouble. Music, painting, writing, stuff that reminds them they matter. She said it casually, but Gerald heard conviction beneath the softness. That sounds bigger than a dream, he said. She smiled faintly. Big things start small. He admired that certainty. In his world, ambition usually connected to profit or expansion. Emily's ambition centered on impact. It challenged him quietly. One Saturday, she invited him to a neighborhood block party after he mentioned having no plans. You don't have to come, she added quickly. It's loud, crowded. People ask personal questions. He laughed. You just described my worst professional nightmare, then maybe you need it. He surprised himself by agreeing. That afternoon changed something fundamental. Music filled the street long before he arrived. Kids ran between folding tables while adults argued passionately about sports, politics, and recipes with equal seriousness. Someone handed him a plate of food within 30 seconds of introduction. You too skinny, an older woman declared, placing extra food on his plate before walking away. Emily nearly doubled over laughing at his confusion. No escape now, she teased. For the first few minutes, Gerald felt out of place. Then something unexpected happened. No one asked what he did for a living. They asked where he was from, what music he liked, whether he preferred sweet tea or lemonade. He wasn't a businessman here, just Gerald. And the simplicity of that felt freeing. Later, watching Emily laugh with neighbors, dance briefly with children, greet elders respectfully, he saw her fully for the first time, rooted, confident, completely herself. She belonged to something larger than individual success. Driving home that night, he realized he felt lighter. The following week, Emily attended one of his charity events downtown. The contrast was immediate. Soft jazz floated through a polished ballroom. Conversation stayed measured, laughter controlled. People shook hands while subtly evaluating status. Emily wore a simple navy dress, elegant without effort. Gerald noticed the way conversations shifted when others learned how they met. At a coffee shop? One woman asked, surprise barely hidden. Emily answered calmly, unbothered. Gerald reached for her hand beneath the table, instinctively offering reassurance. For the first time, he understood how difficult bridging two worlds could be. Later, outside the venue, Emily exhaled deeply. That was different, she said. She shook her head. Just unfamiliar. Everybody looked like they were trying not to say the wrong thing. That's accurate, he admitted. She smiled gently. Your world careful, mine loud. And yet, he said, you handled it better than I do most days. She laughed softly. They stood there a moment longer than necessary, city lights reflecting across downtown Atlanta. Neither labeled what was forming between them, but something steady had begun, not built on excitement or appearance, but understanding growing slowly through shared experiences. Two people discovering that difference didn't automatically mean distance. Sometimes it meant expansion. Love didn't arrive loudly for Emily and Gerald. It settled in gradually, almost politely, like a guest neither realized had decided to stay. Weeks turned into months marked not by dramatic moments but by repetition. Morning coffees becoming expected, conversations stretching beyond convenience, shared laughter appearing before either of them questioned why they looked forward to seeing each other so much. Gerald began adjusting his schedule without announcing it. Meetings shifted earlier so mornings remained free. Calls waited until after he left the cafe. His assistant noticed the pattern long before he admitted it to himself. Emily noticed too. You sure your job okay with how often you disappear in the mornings? She teased one day. He smiled. My job thinks I'm networking. She laughed. You are not networking. He paused, meeting her eyes. No, I'm not. The honesty lingered between them longer than the joke. Their connection grew through ordinary experiences, the kind people rarely recognize as important until later. Late evenings walking along the Beltline, sharing street food while musicians performed nearby. Gerald learning which food trucks Emily trusted and which she avoided. Emily discovering Gerald had an unexpectedly terrible sense of direction when not guided by GPS. You own half the buildings downtown, she joked once, but you can't find parking without technology. Leadership has limits, he replied solemnly. She laughed so hard strangers turned to look. Those moments mattered, not because they were extraordinary, but because they were easy. Gerald found himself talking about things he rarely shared. Childhood expectations, pressure to succeed, the quiet loneliness that followed achievement. Emily listened without trying to fix anything, offering understanding instead of solutions. In return, Emily shared stories of growing up surrounded by cousins and neighbors who functioned like extended family, of church choirs that felt louder than worries, of watching community hold people together when money couldn't. Their worlds didn't clash. They expanded. One Sunday afternoon, Emily invited Gerald to dinner with her family. He arrived carrying store-bought potato salad, proud of what he believed was a thoughtful contribution. The reaction was immediate. An older aunt stared at the container, then at him. Oh, baby. You brave, she said gently. Emily covered her face laughing before explaining later in whispers. In my family, potato salad is serious business. You either make it yourself or don't bring it. Gerald accepted the teasing with surprising ease. By the end of the evening, he was arguing about music with cousins and learning domino rules he never fully understood. Driving home, he realized something unexpected. Nobody cared about his money. Nobody asked about investments. They judged him only on presence, whether he laughed, listened, showed respect. And for the first time in years, he felt accepted without performance. A week later, Emily stepped into Gerald's world again, smaller this time, just dinner with colleagues rather than a formal gala. Still, she noticed differences immediately. Conversations paused slightly when she joined circles. People spoke carefully, curiosity hidden behind politeness. She navigated it gracefully, asking questions, smiling warmly, refusing discomfort the power to define her. Afterward, Gerald apologized unnecessarily. You shouldn't have to adjust so much, he said as they walked toward his car. Emily shook her head. Everybody adjusts somewhere. That's just life. He studied her quietly. Does it bother you? She considered before answering. Only when people assume I don't belong before they know me. The statement stayed with him. Gerald began recognizing things he once overlooked, subtle tensions, unspoken assumptions, the invisible work Emily performed simply existing between different social spaces. It deepened his respect. And slowly, affection turned into something steadier. One rainy evening, they cooked dinner together in Gerald's apartment. Emily criticized his lack of seasoning skills, while he defended himself with exaggerated seriousness. This is culinary innovation, he insisted. This is bland, she corrected. Music played softly while rain tapped against windows. At some point, conversation slowed. Laughter softened into comfortable quiet. Gerald realized he didn't want the evening to end. Emily noticed the way he looked at her. Not rushed, not demanding, just certain. You thinking hard over there, she said gently. I'm realizing something, he admitted. What? That I feel more like myself when you're around. The room grew still. Emily didn't answer immediately. Vulnerability required careful handling. Finally, she said, "That's a dangerous compliment. Why?" "Because it means losing the person might feel like losing yourself." He absorbed her words carefully. "I'm willing to risk that," he said. The honesty surprised both of them. Their first kiss wasn't dramatic. It happened slowly, naturally, like a continuation rather than a beginning. Outside, rain continued falling, steady, patient, while two lives quietly shifted direction. From that point forward, they chose each other openly. Movie nights turned into weekends together. Morning routines blended. Emily left spare shoes near his door. Gerald learned her favorite breakfast without asking. Love unfolded not as excitement, but as partnership. Months later, during an evening walk along the Atlanta Beltline, city lights glowing softly around them, Gerald slowed his steps. Emily noticed immediately. "You walking suspiciously slow." "I'm thinking," he said. "That never ends casually." He stopped near a railing overlooking the skyline. No crowd gathered. No photographer waited. Just passing cyclists and distant laughter from nearby restaurants. Gerald reached into his pocket, hands slightly unsteady. Emily's breath caught. "Gerald, I know life isn't perfect," he began, "and I know I don't have everything figured out, but I know how I feel when I'm with you." He opened a small box. A simple ring caught the light. "I don't want a perfect life," he said softly. "I want a real one. With you." Emily stared at him, emotions colliding. Love, hope, caution shaped by lived experience. "Love is easy when life is calm," she said quietly. "What happens when it's not?" He answered immediately. "We figure it out together." She searched his face for hesitation. There was none, only sincerity and belief. Emily smiled through gathering tears. Yes, the word felt both joyful and serious. A promise made with awareness rather than fantasy. They embraced as the city moved around them, unaware that two different worlds had just committed to becoming one shared future. For a while, happiness felt effortless. But beneath the warmth, small differences remained. Schedules pulling in opposite directions, expectations neither fully understood yet, pressures waiting patiently beyond the horizon. Love had formed, strong, genuine, hopeful. Yet every relationship carries questions invisible at the beginning, questions that only time reveals. And as Emily slipped the ring onto her finger, neither of them realized how soon life would test the promise they believed was unbreakable. Because sometimes love doesn't fail from lack of feeling, but from differences people pretend will never matter. Can love survive differences people pretend not to see? Marriage did not change Emily and Gerald overnight. It changed them quietly. At first, life felt like an extension of everything they had already built. Shared mornings, familiar laughter, the comfort of knowing someone waited at the end of long days. Their apartment carried signs of both worlds learning to live together. Emily's framed community art leaning beside Gerald's neatly stacked business journals. Jazz mixing with old R&B while dinner cooked unevenly because they talked more than they followed recipes. For a while, love felt easy, not effortless, but steady. They learned each other's rhythms. Gerald woke early, reviewing emails before sunrise. Emily preferred slow mornings, stretching conversations over coffee before stepping into the day. He organized calendars, she organized people. He solved problems directly, she listened until solutions revealed themselves naturally. Differences felt interesting then. Almost charming. "You schedule relaxation," Emily teased one Saturday. Glancing at his phone reminder, he defended himself. "Rest requires planning," she laughed. "Rest requires breathing." Moments like that defined their early marriage, gentle humor smoothing edges neither noticed yet. But life rarely stays in its calm chapter. Gerald's company began expanding faster than expected. New developments opened across Atlanta. Investors called constantly. Opportunities arrived wrapped in urgency, each one promising growth too important to ignore. At first, the changes seemed temporary. Late meetings, extra travel, phone calls during dinner that ended with apologies and quick kisses on Emily's forehead. "I'll make it up to you," he would say, and he meant it every time. Emily believed him, because intention still felt stronger than absence. She threw herself deeper into nonprofit work, helping build youth programs that demanded long hours of their own. Her days filled with planning events, writing proposals, mentoring teenagers who trusted her with stories heavier than their age should carry. Both of them were working toward meaningful goals, yet slowly, almost invisibly, their schedules stopped overlapping. Dinner shifted later, conversations shortened, shared evenings turned into exchanged updates. "How was your day?" Became routine rather than curiosity. "Busy," they both answered, and somehow that single word replaced everything else. One evening, Emily waited at the table while food cooled between them. Gerald had texted 30 minutes earlier, running late. She understood. She always understood. Still, she sat there longer than necessary, scrolling through her phone before finally reheating dinner alone. When Gerald arrived nearly an hour later, exhaustion followed him through the door. "I'm sorry," he said immediately, loosening his tie. "Investor call ran long." She nodded, forcing a smile. Food still good. They ate together, but conversation moved carefully, like both were too tired to risk emotional depth. Halfway through the meal, Gerald's phone vibrated again. He glanced at it instinctively. Emily noticed. He silenced it quickly, but the moment had already landed. "You can take it," she said softly. "No, it's fine. You looked worried." He exhaled slowly. "Just pressure. Nothing you need to carry." The sentence sounded protective, but it created distance instead. Emily lowered her fork. "I'm your wife, Gerald. I'm already carrying it, even if you don't tell me what it is." He rubbed his temples, fatigue sharpening his tone unintentionally. "I just don't want to bring stress home." She nodded slowly. "And I don't want to feel like I live outside your real life." Silence followed. Not angry, just heavy. Days passed. Then weeks. Small adjustments continued stacking quietly. Gerald began traveling more frequently. Emily attended events alone when his schedule changed last minute. Messages replaced conversations. Goodnight kisses sometimes happened while one of them was already half asleep. Nothing dramatic happened. That was the danger. There was no single moment either could point to and say, "That's when things changed." Instead, closeness faded in inches. One night, Emily attended a business gathering with Gerald, a networking event filled with polished conversations and careful smiles. She stood beside him as investors discussed expansion plans, speaking confidently about markets and projections. At first, she listened with interest. Then she overheard a quiet comment behind her. "She's nice," a man whispered to another. "But optics matter when you're scaling nationally." Emily didn't react outwardly. She simply held her posture steady. "Optics." The word echoed long after the conversation moved on. Later in the car, city lights passing silently outside, she asked gently, "Do your partners think I don't fit into your world?" Gerald sighed, exhausted more than defensive. "They just don't understand us yet." Yet, a small word. Carrying uncertainty neither addressed. Emily turned toward the window, watching Atlanta blur past. She didn't argue, but something inside her grew quieter. Pressure continued building around Gerald. A major development stalled unexpectedly. Funding tightened. Investors demanded reassurance he wasn't fully ready to give. Sleep became shorter, his patience thinner. Stress reshaped him gradually. He answered questions quickly, spoke while distracted, apologized often but remained mentally elsewhere. Emily noticed before he did. She left encouraging notes near his laptop, cooked late dinners hoping shared meals might slow him down. Sometimes it worked, sometimes he barely noticed, and the hardest part wasn't anger, it was feeling invisible beside someone physically present. One evening she found him sitting alone in the living room, laptop open, eyes fixed on numbers that refused to cooperate. "You've been staring at that screen for hours," she said gently. "I have to fix this. You don't have to fix everything alone." He didn't look up. "This company supports hundreds of people. If it fails—" "I'm not talking about the company," she interrupted softly. "I'm talking about you." He finally met her eyes, and for a brief moment, vulnerability appeared, fear he rarely allowed anyone to see. "I can't afford to slow down right now," he said. Emily sat beside him. "You can't afford to disappear either." The words landed harder than she intended. He closed the laptop slowly. "I'm doing this for us." She nodded, voice calm but fragile. "I know. I just miss us while you're doing it." Neither knew how to solve that truth. From the outside, their marriage still looked strong. Photos posted occasionally, public smiles, shared appearances when schedules aligned. Inside, however, small misunderstandings accumulated, not loud enough to break love, but persistent enough to weaken connection. They still cared deeply, still supported each other, yet both began protecting the other from personal fears instead of sharing them. Gerald hid stress to shield Emily. Emily hid loneliness to avoid adding pressure, and without realizing it, they began living parallel emotional lives inside the same home. Late one night, Emily lay awake listening to Gerald typing in the next room. The sound continued long past midnight. She stared at the ceiling, thoughts drifting. Love was still there. She felt it every day. But something else had entered quietly. Distance created not by lack of feeling, but by unspoken worry. She wondered whether marriage required constant closeness, or whether seasons like this were simply part of growing together. Across the apartment, Gerald paused his work briefly, glancing toward the bedroom door. He wanted to go sit beside her, wanted to talk, but exhaustion convinced him tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow always felt safer. He returned to typing, and somewhere between good intentions and postponed conversations, the first real crack formed, so small neither of them named it, so quiet neither of them heard it, yet powerful enough to begin changing everything that followed. Tension rarely announces itself. It settles slowly, like dust gathering in corners people stop noticing. By the time Emily and Gerald realized something felt different, the change had already taken root in their daily lives. Nothing looked broken from the outside. They still shared a home, still said I love you, still moved around each other with familiarity shaped by years together. But familiarity is not the same as closeness, and closeness requires attention, something both of them were quietly running out of. Autumn arrived in Atlanta with cooler mornings and longer shadows stretching across sidewalks. Emily noticed seasons more than Gerald did. Her work kept her connected to people, to rhythms outside deadlines. She marked time through community events, children growing taller, conversations that continued week after week. Gerald measured time differently now. Quarterly reports, investor calls, expansion deadlines. His calendar filled faster than he could clear it. One evening, Emily waited at a youth showcase she had spent months organizing. Teenagers rehearsed nervously backstage, while families filled folding chairs, excitement humming through the room. Gerald had promised he would come. "You sure he's making it?" one of the volunteers asked gently as Emily checked her phone again. "He said he would," she replied, smiling with confidence she tried to feel. The program began. Music started. Applause followed each performance. Emily clapped, encouraged, supported. But every few minutes her eyes drifted toward the entrance. The door never opened. Halfway through the event, her phone vibrated. "Emergency meeting. I'm so sorry. I'll explain later." Emily stared at the message longer than necessary. She typed "it's okay" before she allowed herself to think too much about why disappointment felt heavier this time. Because it wasn't just about tonight. It was about accumulation. Gerald arrived home late, shoulders tight with exhaustion. Emily sat quietly on the couch, shoes still on, program booklet resting beside her. "They asked about you," she said calmly. "I couldn't get out of it. I know." Her voice held no anger, and somehow that made him more uneasy. He sat beside her. "The investors are nervous. If this deal collapses—" Emily nodded slowly. "Gerald, you don't have to justify it every time." He paused. "Then why does it feel like I do?" Because the distance between explanation and understanding had grown wider than either realized. She turned toward him. "I just wanted you there," she said softly. "Not as a businessman. As my husband. I am your husband." "I know," she said again, but the words sounded different now, quieter. Days passed with polite normalcy. They functioned well together, coordinating schedules, discussing practical things, maintaining routines. But emotional conversations began ending earlier than before. Gerald assumed silence meant stability. Emily felt silence becoming loneliness. Neither recognized the same moment as the beginning of fracture. The argument that changed everything didn't begin dramatically. It started with something small, a missed dinner. Emily had cooked, something simple, familiar, hoping they might reclaim an evening together without interruptions. Candles burned low by the time Gerald finally walked through the door, distracted, still speaking into his phone. "Yes, move the meeting to Monday," he said, pacing slightly. "No, we can't delay construction again." He ended the call and exhaled. "I'm starving." Emily watched quietly from the table. Food sat untouched. "You didn't text," she said. "I lost track of time. You always lose track of time now." The words slipped out before she softened them. Gerald frowned slightly. "I said I'm sorry." "I know. You always are." He paused, sensing something deeper beneath her tone. "What does that mean?" Emily hesitated, then spoke honestly. "It means apologies don't fix absence." The room grew still. Gerald set his keys down harder than intended. "You think I'm choosing work over you?" "I think work always wins," she replied gently. "That's not fair." "I didn't say it was intentional." Frustration crept into his voice. "You know what's at stake right now, and you know what's at stake here," she said, gesturing softly between them. Neither raised their voices. That made it worse, because calm arguments leave no room for emotional release. Gerald ran a hand through his hair. "I'm trying to secure our future." Emily's expression softened with sadness rather than anger. "Our future is happening right now." He didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched, and inside that silence lived exhaustion, fear, misunderstanding, feelings neither fully explained. Finally, Gerald spoke words shaped more by pressure than intention. "You don't understand what I'm dealing with." Emily froze slightly, not because of the sentence itself, but because of what it implied. She nodded slowly. "You're right," she said quietly. "I don't understand anymore." Regret flickered across his face immediately. "That's not what I meant, but it's what you said." They stood on opposite sides of the kitchen, distance suddenly visible. Gerald felt cornered by expectations he didn't know how to balance. Emily felt pushed outside a life she thought they shared. Both were hurting. Both were afraid. Neither knew how to say it without sounding like blame. He tried again. "I'm doing everything I can to keep things stable, and I'm trying to keep us connected," she replied. Their goals weren't opposite, but stress translated love into conflict. Minutes passed in heavy quiet. Finally, Gerald spoke, tired, overwhelmed, searching for relief from pressure that followed him everywhere. Maybe we rushed into this." The words landed softly, but softly doesn't mean gently. Emily didn't cry, didn't argue. She simply absorbed the sentence as if confirming a fear she had never voiced aloud. "Okay," she said after a long pause. The calmness unsettled him instantly. "That's not what I meant," he repeated quickly. But words, once spoken, rarely return unchanged. She nodded again, eyes distant. "Sometimes people realize things later," she said. Her composure hurt more than anger would have, because anger meant fighting. Calm meant withdrawal. That night they slept facing opposite directions, not intentionally, just naturally. Gerald lay awake long after Emily's breathing slowed, replaying the conversation again and again. He wanted to fix it, wanted to explain that exhaustion had spoken louder than his heart, but pride, or maybe fear, convinced him morning would make everything clearer. Across the bed, Emily stared into darkness long after closing her eyes. She wasn't angry. She was tired of wondering whether she still fit into the life Gerald was building, tired of competing with pressures she couldn't see or solve. And for the first time since falling in love, uncertainty replaced security. Morning arrived quietly. They moved through routines carefully, kindness replacing intimacy. "Have a good day," he said. "You too," she answered. A small kiss at the door. Normal, almost convincing, yet something essential had shifted overnight. Because sometimes relationships don't break during shouting matches. They begin breaking when honest feelings arrive too late, after silence has already done its work. Silence does not arrive all at once. It grows. After the argument, Emily and Gerald moved through their home carefully, two people trying not to reopen a wound neither fully understood yet. Nothing dramatic followed. No slammed doors. No cruel words thrown in anger. Just restraint. And sometimes restraint creates more distance than conflict ever could. Morning routines continued. Coffee brewed. Work schedules overlapped briefly near the doorway before separating again. They spoke kindly, respectfully even, but conversations stayed near the surface, safe topics only. Weather, meetings, groceries, never feelings, never fear. The apartment felt quieter despite both of them still living inside it. Gerald convinced himself things would settle once work pressure eased. He focused harder, believing stability would repair emotional strain naturally. If he could secure the company's future, everything else would fall back into place. That belief gave him direction, but it also gave him permission to postpone difficult conversations. Emily noticed, not immediately, but gradually she realized waiting for the right time to talk meant the conversation never came. One evening she sat alone on the balcony, Atlanta lights stretching endlessly beyond the railing. Cars moved below like distant thoughts, constant, unstoppable. Gerald stepped outside minutes later, phone finally silent. "You okay?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Just thinking." He leaned beside her, unsure how to bridge the quiet space between them. "I know things have been hard lately," he began. Emily looked at him carefully. Hard. The word felt too small. "We keep saying that," she replied softly. "But we never say what we're actually feeling." He hesitated. Because naming feelings required admitting uncertainty, something Gerald had spent his entire life learning to control. "I feel pressure," he admitted finally. "Every decision feels like it affects everything." She listened patiently. "And I feel like I'm losing you while you're trying to protect us," she said. The honesty landed gently but firmly. He looked down at his hands. "I thought giving you space from all this would help." "I never asked for space," she whispered. The sentence lingered between them, two truths colliding quietly, protection mistaken for distance, independence mistaken for rejection. Weeks passed without resolution. They tried small repairs, dinner dates, shared evenings without phones, polite efforts to return to normal. But emotional rhythm once broken takes time to relearn, and both of them were exhausted. Gerald's company crisis deepened. Investors demanded reassurance, meetings stretched longer, travel increased. Every success required more sacrifice than the last. Emily, meanwhile, poured herself into work and community, finding comfort where connections still felt natural. Friends noticed she smiled slightly less but asked no direct questions. Support sometimes means allowing someone space to speak when ready. Inside their marriage, however, uncertainty continued growing quietly. The conversation that ended things came unexpectedly, not during anger, not during conflict, during calm. They sat at the kitchen table late one night, paperwork spread between them, schedules, bills, ordinary responsibilities that suddenly felt heavier than before. Gerald looked tired in a way Emily hadn't seen before, not just physically, emotionally worn. "I've been thinking," he said slowly. Her chest tightened slightly. "I think maybe we're hurting each other without meaning to." Emily didn't interrupt. He continued carefully, choosing words as if each one carried weight. "I don't want you living inside uncertainty because of my work, and right now I don't know how to give you the attention you deserve." She swallowed quietly. "And what are you saying?" she asked. He exhaled. "Maybe we need time apart. Until things stabilize." The words sounded reasonable, logical, even gentle, but heartbreak rarely arrives loudly. Sometimes it sounds like compromise. Emily stared at the table, absorbing the meaning behind the suggestion. "You think distance will fix us?" she asked. "I think pressure is changing who I am," he admitted. "And I don't want that version of me hurting you." Tears formed but didn't fall, because part of her understood his fear. Another part felt abandoned by it. After a long silence, she nodded slowly. "If that's what you believe is best." Neither said the word separation immediately. Yet both understood it had already entered the room. The following weeks moved with strange efficiency. Papers signed quietly, logistics handled respectfully. Conversations remained calm, almost too calm, as if emotion waited somewhere neither dared to visit. Friends described their separation as mature. There was no scandal, no betrayal, just exhaustion and misunderstanding. They packed belongings together one afternoon, pausing occasionally when memories surfaced unexpectedly. A photograph from a trip, a cookbook stained from shared dinners, small reminders of a life once simple. At one point, Gerald picked up Emily's favorite mug. "You should take this," he said. She smiled faintly. "You bought it. You used it more." The exchange felt painfully ordinary. Love still existed, but direction had disappeared. The day Emily moved out, rain fell lightly across Atlanta streets. Gerald carried boxes to her car while she checked lists repeatedly, avoiding eye contact longer than necessary. When everything was loaded, they stood facing each other uncertainly. No speech prepared them for goodbye. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said quietly. "I know," she answered. "I thought I was doing the right thing." She nodded again. So did I. They embraced, familiar, warm, heartbreaking. Neither held on long enough, because sometimes letting go feels easier than admitting you still want to stay. Emily drove away slowly. Gerald watched until her car disappeared into traffic. The silence afterward felt immediate, final. He returned upstairs to an apartment suddenly too large for one person, and convinced himself separation was temporary, that once life calmed, they would find their way back. 3 weeks later, Emily sat alone in her new apartment bathroom holding a small plastic test in trembling hands. 2 lines, clear, unmistakable. She laughed once, a sound caught between disbelief and fear, then tears followed, pregnant. She sat on the floor, breathing slowly, trying to understand how one moment could change everything again. Her first instinct was simple. Call Gerald, tell him immediately. She even reached for her phone. But memories surfaced, his exhaustion, the pressure crushing him, the way he believed distance protected her from instability. She lowered the phone slowly. Would telling him help, or add another burden when he was already struggling to stand? Emily closed her eyes. Love guided her decision more than pride. "I'll handle this," she whispered to herself, not out of anger, out of protection. And in that quiet apartment, she made a choice that would shape years of their lives without him ever knowing. She would raise the children herself. Outside, Atlanta continued moving, unaware that 2 lives once intertwined had just taken separate paths carrying the same unfinished love. Gerald rebuilt his world believing the hardest chapter had ended. Emily prepared for motherhood believing sacrifice sometimes meant silence. Neither realized how deeply that silence would echo into the future. Because sometimes goodbye isn't the end of love. Sometimes it is only the beginning of consequences. And the question left behind lingered softly, waiting for time to answer. Is silence ever an act of love? The first weeks after Emily learned she was pregnant felt unreal. Not dramatic, not loud, just strangely quiet. She moved through her apartment carefully, as if sudden motion might disturb the fragile truth growing inside her. Morning light filtered through thin curtains while Atlanta traffic murmured outside, life continuing exactly as it always had, unaware that hers had changed completely. Some mornings she woke hopeful. Other mornings, she sat at the edge of her bed staring at nothing, one hand resting unconsciously over her stomach, breathing slowly while questions gathered faster than answers. 2 lines. That was all it took for the future to rearrange itself. She thought about Gerald often during those early days, not with anger, not even regret, just memory. The way he laughed unexpectedly, the way he tried to fix problems before understanding feelings, the way he believed protecting someone sometimes meant stepping away. More than once she picked up her phone. More than once she put it back down. Not now, she whispered to herself, though she wasn't entirely sure whether she was protecting him or herself. Pregnancy changed time. Weeks stretched longer while days disappeared quickly. Emily continued working, refusing to let fear define her routine. At the community center, she organized programs, smiled through exhaustion, and listened to teenagers describe dreams bigger than their circumstances. Their hope strengthened her. If they could believe in tomorrow, so could she. Still, fatigue followed her everywhere. Simple tasks required effort she hadn't anticipated. Some evenings she returned home too tired to cook, sitting quietly with takeout containers while soft music filled the room. Loneliness visited most at night. Not crushing loneliness, just the absence of someone who once shared ordinary moments. She allowed herself to feel it. Then she breathed through it. Strength, she was learning, did not mean pretending pain didn't exist. It meant continuing anyway. Her community noticed before she announced anything. An older neighbor paused one afternoon in the hallway, studying her carefully. "You eating enough?" the woman asked gently. Emily laughed nervously. "I think so." The woman nodded knowingly, saying nothing else. But the next morning a container of homemade food appeared outside Emily's door. No note, just care. That became a pattern. Someone offered rides when she felt too tired for public transit. Church friends checked in casually, conversations lingering longer than usual. Support arrived without interrogation, woven into daily life naturally. Nobody demanded explanations, they simply showed up. And slowly, Emily realized she wasn't alone, even if she was raising her children without their father beside her. The first ultrasound changed everything. She lay still while the technician moved the device gently across her stomach. The room felt calm, almost sacred. Then the screen shifted. 2 shapes appeared. Emily blinked. "Wait," she said softly. The technician smiled. "Looks like you've got twins." For a moment, Emily couldn't speak. A laugh escaped her, startled, emotional, disbelieving all at once. Tears followed immediately after, sliding quietly toward her ears as she stared at the monitor. 2 heartbeats, 2 lives. Her hands trembled slightly. "Well," she whispered, voice breaking into a smile, "guess we doing this big." Fear arrived too, naturally, but joy stood beside it just as strong. That evening she sat alone in her apartment talking aloud softly. "I don't know everything yet," she told them, "but you're coming into love. That I promise." The room felt less empty afterward. Pregnancy progressed with challenges she never romanticized. Swollen feet, sleepless nights, sudden waves of emotion that arrived without warning. Some mornings she laughed at herself, others she cried without fully understanding why, and sometimes she missed Gerald so deeply it surprised her, not because she doubted her decision, because shared joy had once been their language. She wondered briefly how he might have reacted to the news. Shock first, then careful planning, then determination to solve everything immediately. The thought made her smile sadly. "You would have panicked," she murmured once. Then silence returned. Life moved forward anyway. The twins arrived on a warm Atlanta morning filled with nervous anticipation and whispered prayers. Labor lasted longer than she expected. Pain came in waves strong enough to erase every prepared thought. She gripped hospital sheets, breathing through fear while encouragement surrounded her from nurses and familiar voices offering reassurance. And then, a cry. High, powerful, undeniable. Tears filled her eyes instantly. Moments later another cry followed, slightly softer but just as determined. 2 tiny lives placed gently against her chest. Emily laughed through exhaustion. "Hi," she whispered, voice trembling. "I've been waiting for you." Mia arrived first, loud, expressive, already announcing her presence. Emily studied their faces carefully, pieces of herself, pieces of Gerald. Love expanded inside her so quickly it almost frightened her. In that moment, exhaustion disappeared beneath purpose. She was no longer just surviving. She was responsible for 2 futures. The early months tested her more than anything she had ever experienced. Sleep became fragmented. Days blurred together through feeding schedules and soft lullabies sung half awake. Laundry multiplied mysteriously. Silence vanished completely, replaced by cries, giggles, and constant movement. Some nights she sat on the couch holding both babies, rocking gently, while city lights blinked through the window. "I got you," she whispered repeatedly, sometimes reassuring them, sometimes herself. There were difficult moments. Moments she doubted her strength. Moments she wished someone else could share the weight even briefly. But every morning, when Mia laughed without reason or Liam curled his tiny fingers around hers, certainty returned. Love was enough to continue. Community filled gaps she could not manage alone. Neighbors babysat occasionally so she could rest. Church friends delivered meals. Someone assembled a crib when instructions felt overwhelming. Support arrived not as charity but as shared responsibility, the kind built through years of connection. Emily learned something important during that season. Independence did not mean isolation. Accepting help required courage too, and slowly, confidence replaced fear. She mastered routines, learned each child's personality, discovered humor in chaos, laughing when both babies cried simultaneously as if coordinating rebellion. "You two already teaming up on me," she joked tiredly. Their laughter answered back. Years passed gently. Mia grew fearless, chasing everything that moved. Liam remained thoughtful, observing before acting, carrying toys with serious responsibility. Emily watched them play in parks, pride mixing with exhaustion. Her life wasn't glamorous. Bills required careful planning. Work demanded balance. Some dreams moved slower than she once imagined. But fulfillment lived in small moments. Bedtime stories, shared laughter, tiny hands reaching for hers without hesitation. She had built a home defined not by ease, but by love. And though Gerald never knew it, pieces of him lived inside their children every single day. In expressions, gestures, even the quiet way Liam studied new environments before trusting them. Emily never spoke negatively about their father. Not once. Because love, even unfinished love, deserved dignity. One afternoon, watching Mia and Liam chase bubbles across a park, Emily felt something unexpected settle inside her. Peace, not perfect happiness, not absence of struggle, just acceptance. Life had not followed the path she once imagined, but it had still led somewhere meaningful. She smiled softly, calling out, "Stay where I can see you." The twins laughed, running closer, and as sunlight stretched across the grass, Emily realized strength had grown quietly inside her, not from avoiding hardship, but from living through it day after day. Unseen, uncelebrated, yet undeniable, a life Gerald had never witnessed was already full. Success returned to Gerald slowly, and then all at once. At first it arrived as small victories, a recovered investment, a project saved from collapse, a contract signed after months of uncertainty. Each win felt fragile, like something that could disappear if he relaxed too soon. So he didn't relax. He worked harder. Longer hours, sharper focus, fewer distractions. Pain, he discovered, could be converted into productivity if a person stayed busy enough. Atlanta's skyline changed alongside his recovery. New buildings rose where empty lots once stood, and Gerald's company name began appearing again in business conversations spoken with renewed respect. People called him resilient, determined, a comeback story. They admired the outcome without knowing the cost. His new office overlooked Buckhead, glass walls reflecting a version of himself that looked composed, successful, complete. Tailored suits returned. Interviews followed. Magazine features described his leadership style with confident certainty. Gerald learned how to smile on command again, how to speak about vision and growth while avoiding questions that drifted too close to personal life. Because success filled schedules, but not silence. Evenings remained the hardest. The penthouse he moved into after the separation felt impressive at first. Wide windows framing the city lights, modern furniture chosen more for appearance than comfort, quiet so deep it almost echoed. At night he sometimes turned on the television simply to hear voices, not to watch, just noise. He told himself solitude meant peace, yet peace never quite arrived. Certain habits lingered despite time passing. He kept waking early, instinctively brewing 2 cups of coffee before realizing only one was needed. Music playlists still included songs Emily loved. He never removed them, not intentionally, just never found a reason strong enough to do it. Memory lived quietly inside routine. One evening he opened a kitchen cabinet searching for a glass and found an old mug she had forgotten to take. He stared at it longer than expected. A small thing, yet suddenly heavy. "You probably replaced this already," he murmured, setting it back carefully instead of throwing it away. He told himself keeping it meant nothing. Still, he never used it. Dating came and went without significance. Friends encouraged him to move forward. A few dinners happened. Polite conversations. Pleasant enough evenings that ended without emotional weight. Gerald realized quickly he compared every meaningful moment to something unspoken. Laughter that felt easier, conversations that required less effort, connection that once existed naturally. Comparison isn't fair, but it happens anyway. Eventually he stopped trying. Work felt simpler, predictable, safe. Years reshaped him subtly. He became calmer in meetings, less reactive under pressure. Experience softened his urgency. Teaching patients success had once demanded he ignore, yet growth carried loneliness alongside it. During celebrations, project launches, company milestones, he often found himself stepping away briefly, standing near windows watching the city below. Applause echoed behind him, but achievement felt quieter inside. He wondered sometimes whether success tasted different when nobody waited at home to hear about it. The thought passed quickly each time. He returned to conversations before reflection deepened too far. One Saturday morning, Gerald lingered longer than usual at home. No meeting scheduled, no urgent calls. The silence stretched comfortably at first, then uncomfortably. He walked through rooms slowly, noticing how untouched everything remained. Furniture exactly where it had been placed months earlier. No misplaced shoes, no laughter drifting from another room. Order without life. He opened his phone absent-mindedly and scrolled through old photos stored deeper than he admitted. Emily laughing beside a food truck. Emily dancing barefoot in their old apartment kitchen. Emily looking at him without expectation, just warmth. His thumb hovered over the screen. He stopped before reaching wedding photos. Some memories still felt too close. He locked the phone and set it down carefully. "Hope you're okay," he said quietly into an empty room, unsure whether the words were meant for her or himself. Work soon reclaimed his attention. Expansion projects multiplied. Investors trusted him again. Financial success surpassed even his previous achievements. He became officially a millionaire. The title sounded impressive when spoken aloud by others. To Gerald, it felt strangely neutral. Money solved problems efficiently. Housing, security, opportunity. But it never addressed the quiet question that followed him home each night. What was all of this for now? He never answered directly. Instead, he donated more frequently to community initiatives supporting youth programs and neighborhood developments across Atlanta. Something about those projects felt meaningful beyond profit. He rarely visited them personally, until one invitation arrived that he almost ignored. His assistant reminded him twice about a community redevelopment event his company sponsored near southwest Atlanta. It would be good visibility, she explained. Local partnerships matter. Gerald glanced at the schedule. Another appearance, another speech. He nearly declined. Corporate events exhausted him lately. Rehearsed conversations, predictable compliments, polite networking disguised as connection. But investors would attend. So he agreed. The morning of the event arrived warm and bright. Gerald dressed automatically, adjusting his jacket while reviewing talking points he barely needed. Public speaking no longer intimidated him. Emotional conversations did. Driving toward the neighborhood felt strangely familiar, though he couldn't immediately place why. Atlanta shifted as he moved through different districts. Glass towers giving way to older buildings, murals coloring street corners, music drifting openly through rolled-down car windows. Life felt closer here, less filtered. He parked near a renovated park filled with families gathering for the event. Children ran freely across open grass while vendors prepared food nearby. Laughter carried easily through the air, uncontained and genuine. Gerald stepped out of his car, adjusting his watch automatically. For a moment, he simply observed. People greeting each other warmly, parents calling out reminders, music playing somewhere nearby. The environment felt different from boardrooms, unpredictable, alive. He exhaled slowly, tension leaving his shoulders without explanation. Maybe this would be a shorter visit than expected. Maybe he would leave early. He began walking toward the event area, rehearsing polite greetings in his mind. Then, laughter reached him, high-pitched, unfiltered. Children's laughter has a way of interrupting adult thoughts completely. Two small figures ran across the grass, chasing floating bubbles, joy visible in every movement. A little girl laughed loudly as bubbles burst around her face. A little boy followed carefully behind, gripping a toy truck with serious determination. Gerald smiled unconsciously. Something about them felt familiar. He couldn't explain why, just a brief feeling, like recognition arriving before understanding. He watched a moment longer than intended, and without realizing it, he had already taken a step closer. Life sometimes changes direction quietly, not through decisions, through moments. And Gerald stood only seconds away from encountering a truth that would rearrange everything he believed he understood about his past and his future. Some moments do not announce themselves as important. They arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary seconds. Gerald stood near the edge of the park, hands resting loosely at his sides, watching children run through sunlight while conversations blended into soft background noise. Music played somewhere behind him. A grill sizzled nearby. Families laughed in the easy rhythm of a weekend afternoon. He had attended hundreds of public events before. None had ever made him feel still. Yet something about this place slowed his thoughts. Maybe it was the neighborhood familiarity, maybe the absence of expectation, or maybe, though he did not know it yet, part of his life had already stepped into view. The little girl chasing Bubbles laughed again, loud and fearless. She spun in circles, curls bouncing as if joy itself guided her movement. The boy followed more cautiously, clutching a toy truck against his chest like responsibility too serious for someone so small. Gerald smiled. Children often fascinated him. Their honesty, their lack of performance, they existed fully in each moment, untouched by calculation. The girl suddenly tripped. Before Gerald could react, a woman rushed forward, kneeling quickly to lift her. "It's okay, Mia," she said softly, brushing grass from the child's knees. "You're tougher than that." Gerald froze. The voice reached him before recognition did. Familiar, warm, unmistakable. The woman stood, turning slightly. Emily. Time did not slow. It stopped. 5 years collapsed inward, memories rushing forward without permission. Coffee shop mornings, laughter along the belt line, quiet evenings that once felt permanent. She looked older, yes, but not changed in the ways that mattered. Strength rested naturally in her posture. Calm lived in her expression. And she was smiling. Gerald's breath left him before words formed. "Emily?" Her eyes lifted. "Hi, Gerald." Polite, gentle, almost formal, as if history required distance. The children looked between them curiously. The little girl clung to Emily's hand. The boy studied Gerald with careful seriousness. Gerald felt an unfamiliar tightening in his chest. He struggled to organize thoughts that refused structure. I didn't know you were here," he said. "I never left Atlanta," she replied calmly. Silence settled briefly. Not hostile, just full. The little girl pointed directly at him. "You tall," she announced confidently. Emily sighed softly. "Mia, we don't comment on people like that." Gerald laughed awkwardly. "It's okay. She's right." The tension softened slightly. Children have a way of breaking emotional walls adults spend years building. The boy stepped closer, examining Gerald's watch with focused curiosity. "You got a big watch," he said. Gerald crouched slightly without thinking. "You notice that?" The boy nodded seriously. Emily watched the interaction carefully, emotions passing quietly across her face. Gerald stood again, eyes drifting back toward the children. Something stirred inside him, recognition without explanation. He couldn't name it, only feel it. They moved toward a nearby bench while the twins returned to playing within sight. Gerald sat slowly, unsure where to begin. How have you been?" he asked. Emily considered the question honestly. He nodded, searching for safer ground. "That's good." But his attention kept returning to the children, their expressions, their mannerisms, the boy's thoughtful stillness, the girl's fearless laughter. A quiet realization began forming, not fully understood yet, but impossible to ignore. Finally, he asked, voice careful, "How old are they?" Emily hesitated. "Not long, just long enough. 3. The number landed heavily. Gerald's mind moved quickly, timelines aligning before emotion caught up. 3 years. 3 years since the separation. His heartbeat quickened. "Emily," he said quietly. She met his gaze. There was no avoidance now, no confusion, only truth waiting. "Yes," one word, soft, certain. Understanding arrived all at once. The world seemed louder suddenly. Children shouting, music playing, conversations overlapping. Yet inside Gerald, everything felt distant. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I know," she replied gently. No accusation, no anger, just fact. He leaned back slightly, absorbing the weight of lost time pressing against his chest. Joy tried to appear. So did shock. But regret arrived first. 3 years of first steps, first words, bedtime stories he never read, moments that existed without him. His voice trembled slightly. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emily watched Mia and Liam carefully before answering. "You were losing everything back then," she said softly. "Your company, your stability, yourself. I didn't want to come another pressure." "That wasn't your decision to make," he said, pain surfacing despite restraint. "I wasn't punishing you," she replied calmly. "I was protecting what we both were barely holding together." He didn't respond immediately, because part of him understood, and that understanding hurt more than anger would have. The twins ran back toward them. Mia climbed onto the bench beside Emily without hesitation. Liam stood in front of Gerald again, studying him closely. Children sense connection before explanations exist. Emily spoke gently. "Kids, this is Gerald, not Dad, just Gerald, a boundary shaped by years of absence." Gerald felt the distinction deeply but accepted it silently. "Aye," he said softly. Mia smiled instantly before running off again. Liam lingered a moment longer, then followed. I missed everything, he said quietly. Emily didn't disagree, but she didn't confirm it either. Some truths didn't need reinforcement, they simply existed. After a moment, Gerald noticed something else. Subtle exhaustion in Emily's posture, careful movements suggesting fatigue she tried to hide. You okay? He asked gently. She hesitated. I've been managing. The word carried weight. What's going on? He pressed softly. She exhaled. My nonprofit funding got cut recently. I've been picking up extra work, trying to keep things steady. Gerald's response came instinctively. Let me help. Her answer followed just as quickly. No, firm, not angry, just proud. I didn't tell you about them to ask for money. I know, he said quietly. But they're my children too. The sentence changed the air between them, reality settling into place, responsibility awakening. Gerald looked toward Mia and Liam again, laughter echoing across the park, and felt something inside him rearrange permanently. Success, wealth, reputation. None of it compared to the small hand that had just touched his sleeve minutes earlier. For the first time in years, he felt unsure of himself, not as a businessman, as a father. Mia suddenly ran back toward them, studying his face carefully. Why you sad? She asked. Emily laughed softly despite everything. She asks everybody that. I just met some very important people. Mia accepted the answer instantly and ran off again. Gerald swallowed emotion. Children rarely question sincerity. He turned back to Emily. I want to do this right, he said, however long it takes. Emily studied him quietly, not searching for promises but consistency. Trust rebuilds slowly. We take it one step at a time, she said. Not forgiveness, not rejection, possibility. Gerald nodded. As he walked back toward his car later, the world looked different than it had that morning. He arrived expecting another routine appearance. He left understanding the most important chapter of his life had already begun without him, and now he would have to earn his way into it. If this moment makes you pause, take a second and reflect with me, and share your thoughts below. What hurts more, abandonment or lost time? The first time Gerald visited Emily's apartment after the park reunion, he arrived 10 minutes early, then sat in his car for 5 more, not because he wanted to leave, but because uncertainty felt unfamiliar to him. Business meetings had rules, negotiations had structure, even conflict followed predictable patterns. Fatherhood, however, came without instructions. He watched families pass along the sidewalk, parents guiding children across the street with casual confidence he envied quietly. You can learn this, he muttered to himself, exhaling slowly before stepping out. The building looked modest but warm, bicycles leaning against railings, chalk drawings fading along the pavement, the faint sound of laughter drifting from open windows. Life lived closely here, shared, visible. He carried a small bag in his hand. Inside were toys he had spent nearly 30 minutes choosing, unsure what 3-year-olds actually liked. The store clerk had tried to help, but Gerald still felt uncertain walking away. He knocked gently. Footsteps approached. The door opened. Emily stood there, calm as always, though a trace of nervousness lived behind her steady expression. Hi, she said softly. Hi. A brief pause followed, not uncomfortable, just aware. Then a small voice shouted from inside, Mommy, Bubbles! Mia appeared instantly, stopping mid-run when she noticed Gerald. Recognition flashed across her face. You tall again, she announced confidently. Emily covered a laugh. Gerald smiled, kneeling slightly, still tall. Behind her, Liam peeked carefully around the corner, toy truck already in hand. He didn't approach immediately, observing first, measuring safety in silence. Gerald noticed. Something about that cautious curiosity felt familiar. Emily stepped aside. You can come in. The apartment carried warmth immediately. Toys neatly organized but clearly used, drawings taped to the refrigerator, the faint smell of something recently cooked lingering in the air. It wasn't large, but it felt alive. Gerald stood awkwardly near the entrance until Mia grabbed his hand without hesitation. Come see, she demanded, pulling him toward a pile of blocks. He looked at Emily uncertainly. She nodded gently. It's okay. And just like that, his first lesson began. Playing with children required surrendering control. Gerald learned this within minutes. He tried building a careful tower while explaining structure and balance, habits shaped by years of development projects. Mia knocked it over immediately. Again, she laughed. He blinked. You destroyed it. That's the fun part, Emily said from the kitchen. Liam quietly handed Gerald another block, serious expression unchanged. Gerald rebuilt. Mia destroyed it again. Soon he found himself laughing, genuinely, unexpectedly, as the cycle repeated without purpose or outcome. No productivity, no achievement, just presence. and for the first time in years, doing something without measurable success felt strangely meaningful. Later, snack time introduced new challenges. Emily handed him a small plate. "You want to help?" He nodded confidently. Confidence disappeared quickly. Mia rejected apple slices for being too shiny. Liam insisted his snack remain separated precisely. Juice nearly spilled twice before Gerald learned tiny hands moved unpredictably. Emily watched quietly, amusement softening her expression. "You're doing fine," she reassured. "I negotiate million-dollar contracts," he whispered back. "This is harder." She laughed under her breath. "Kids don't care about credentials." He was beginning to understand that. As afternoon light filled the apartment, Gerald noticed how naturally Emily moved through motherhood, anticipating needs before they were spoken, balancing patience with gentle firmness. Strength lived in ordinary moments here, not dramatic strength, consistent strength. He felt admiration and humility. "You've done all this alone," he said quietly while the twins colored nearby. Emily shrugged lightly. "Not alone, just differently supported." He nodded, recognizing truth without argument. Silence settled comfortably for a moment. Then Mia climbed onto his lap without warning. He froze slightly, unsure whether to move. She leaned back casually, completely trusting. The weight of that trust hit him unexpectedly. Small arms rested against him as if he had always belonged there. His throat tightened. He didn't speak, just sat still, afraid movement might break the moment. Across the room, Emily noticed and looked away gently, giving him privacy inside discovery. Later, they walked together to a nearby playground. Gerald stayed close at first, unsure when to intervene or step back. Emily offered quiet guidance without instruction. "You don't have to hover," she said softly. "I don't know the rules." She smiled faintly. "There aren't many. Just pay attention." So he did. He watched Mia climb fearlessly, cheering louder than expected when she reached the top of the slide. He stood ready when Liam hesitated near the swings, offering a hand only after the boy reached for it first. Trust built slowly, not through declarations, through repetition, through showing up. At one point, Liam handed him the toy truck voluntarily, a simple gesture. Yet Gerald accepted it carefully, understanding instinctively it meant approval. "Thank you," he said seriously. Liam nodded, satisfied. Emily laughed softly nearby. "You just passed inspection." Gerald smiled. High standards. Evening approached sooner than expected. Back at the apartment, exhaustion settled over the twins. Bedtime routines unfolded, pajamas, stories, quiet negotiations about sleeping. Emily handed Gerald a book hesitantly. "You want to read tonight?" He hesitated only briefly before nodding. His voice sounded uncertain at first, stumbling over exaggerated character voices that made Mia giggle uncontrollably. Liam listened intently, eyes slowly closing. Halfway through the story, Gerald realized something strange. He felt calm, not successful, not accomplished, just present. And presence felt heavier than achievement ever had. When the twins finally slept, he stepped quietly into the living room. Emily sat on the couch, tired but peaceful. "You handled today well," she said. "I felt like I was learning a new language." "You are." He nodded slowly. "I miss so much." She studied him carefully. "Yes," she said gently, "but you're here now." The words carried neither blame nor forgiveness, just truth. He sat back, absorbing the weight of that opportunity. Outside, Atlanta traffic hummed softly through the night. Inside, something unfamiliar settled within Gerald. Not redemption, not yet. Belonging, fragile, uncertain, but real. Because sometimes the biggest lessons in life don't come from success or failure. They come from small hands teaching you how to slow down long enough to matter. Change did not arrive suddenly after Gerald began visiting regularly. It unfolded slowly, cautiously, like two people learning how to walk across a bridge they once watched collapse. Weeks passed in small routines. Gerald visited after work when schedules allowed. Sometimes he brought dinner. Sometimes he simply showed up and followed whatever rhythm already existed inside Emily's home. The twins began expecting him, Mia announcing his arrival before he knocked, Liam waiting quietly near the door as if confirming consistency mattered more than excitement. Trust, Gerald learned, grew through repetition, not promises, presence, and Emily noticed everything, not loudly, not critically, just carefully. She watched whether he arrived when he said he would, whether he listened when the twins spoke, whether his phone stayed in his pocket instead of stealing his attention. Consistency told truths words could not. One evening, rain tapped gently against the windows while the four of them sat on the living room floor assembling puzzles. Mia insisted on leading despite placing pieces incorrectly with confident authority. Liam studied shapes patiently before offering corrections. Gerald followed their instructions seriously, earning laughter when he pretended confusion. "You're doing it wrong," Mia declared. I'm learning from experts, he replied. Emily laughed from the couch, arms folded comfortably as she watched the scene unfold. The sound surprised her. It had been a long time since laughter inside her home felt shared rather than carried alone. For a moment, memory overlapped with present, echoes of earlier years when Gerald's presence felt natural instead of newly earned. The realization made her quiet. Healing, she understood, did not erase history. It layered over it. After the twins fell asleep, Gerald lingered near the kitchen, unsure whether to leave immediately or stay longer. Emily poured tea without asking if he wanted some, habit returning before permission. He accepted the cup with a soft smile. Thank you. They sat across from each other at the small table, rain filling pauses between conversation. You're different, Emily said eventually. Gerald nodded slightly. I had a lot of time to think. About work? He shook his head. About what success actually means. She waited. He searched for words carefully. I spent years believing stability meant providing money, security, solutions. But I never realized presence mattered more. Emily traced the rim of her cup thoughtfully. You always cared, she said gently. You just expressed it differently. I expressed it poorly, he corrected. A quiet smile touched her lips. Honesty suited him now. Silence followed, comfortable, reflective. Outside, headlights moved slowly along wet streets. Inside, something softer formed between them. Not romance yet, but familiarity returning cautiously. I never stopped wondering if you were okay, Gerald admitted. Emily looked up, surprised by the vulnerability. I was, she said after a pause. Not always easy, but okay. He nodded, absorbing the answer without asking more. Respecting boundaries felt important now. After a moment, she added quietly, I never stopped believing you were trying your best either. The statement lingered longer than expected. Forgiveness sometimes begins as understanding rather than declaration. Their reconnection happened through ordinary moments rather than dramatic conversations, cooking dinner together while Mia insisted on stirring everything regardless of instructions. Grocery shopping where Liam held Gerald's hand instinctively while walking through crowded aisles. Movie nights interrupted by endless questions from curious children. Each shared experience softened distance left by years apart. And slowly, Emily relaxed. Not completely, but enough to stop measuring every interaction against past disappointment. One night, while cleaning toys after bedtime, their hands brushed accidentally. Both paused. Not from discomfort, from awareness. The touch carried memory, familiarity neither had fully forgotten. Emily pulled back gently, not rejecting. Just careful, Gerald understood immediately. Some things required patience. Love especially could not be rushed back into existence. Later that week they sat together on the balcony after the twins slept, Atlanta air warm and calm around them. Traffic hummed softly below. You know, Emily said, gazing outward, I learned something after everything changed. What's that? That love doesn't disappear just because life shifts. It just changes shape. He listened closely. I never stopped loving you, she continued quietly. I just learned how to live without you. The honesty settled deeply. Gerald swallowed, emotion tightening his voice. I never stopped regretting leaving. He didn't move closer, didn't reach for her. He waited. Because this time, connection needed choice, not urgency. Minutes passed before Emily leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. The gesture felt small, yet enormous. Gerald exhaled slowly, afraid even breathing too loudly might interrupt the moment. Rain began again softly, tapping against railings. Neither spoke. Words felt unnecessary. Still, rebuilding carried uncertainty. Emily remained practical. They discussed schedules, parenting decisions, boundaries, conversations grounded in reality rather than emotion alone. We take things slow, she reminded him gently. I understand, and the kids come first. Always, he agreed. Their relationship now existed inside responsibility, not just feeling. Strangely, that made it stronger. Gerald found himself changing outside her apartment too. He left work earlier when possible, delegated responsibilities he once controlled obsessively. Even colleagues noticed the shift. You seem calmer, one remarked. Gerald simply smiled. He didn't explain that calm came from bedtime stories and playground laughter instead of financial victories. He didn't need to explain. He felt it. One evening Mia asked suddenly during dinner, You stay tomorrow? Gerald hesitated only briefly. Yes, he said. Her grin answered everything. Liam nodded approvingly, returning to his food. Emily watched quietly, emotion passing through her eyes, gratitude mixed with caution. Hope, she had learned, must be handled gently. Later that night, after Gerald prepared to leave, they stood near the doorway longer than necessary. Old habits almost returned. He looked at her carefully. I don't want to rush anything, he said. I just want to keep showing up. She nodded. That's enough right now. He smiled softly, and for the first time since their separation, the space between goodbye and tomorrow felt smaller. Not erased, but healing. Because love, when given another chance, rarely returns dramatically. It comes back carefully, step by step, until two people realize they are no longer rebuilding what they lost. They are creating something wiser than before. Healing has a quiet rhythm. For a while, life settled into something gentle, not perfect, not certain, but balanced enough to breathe inside. Gerald's visits became part of the twins' routine. Emily no longer felt the need to prepare emotionally before he arrived. Laughter returned more easily. Even silence between them carried comfort instead of tension. From the outside, it looked like reconciliation moving naturally toward happiness. But healing stories rarely travel in straight lines. Sometimes the hardest truths wait until hope feels safe again. Gerald noticed the changes slowly. At first it was small things. Emily sitting down more often while the twins played instead of moving constantly like she once had. A slight pause before standing, as if gathering strength unnoticed. The way she pressed her hand lightly against her chest when she thought no one was watching. He told himself she was tired. Single parenting left marks anyone would carry. Still, something felt different. One afternoon at the playground, Mia ran toward the swings while Liam insisted Gerald push him higher than before. Emily watched from a nearby bench, smiling, but quieter than usual. "You okay?" Gerald asked when he sat beside her briefly. "Just tired," she answered quickly. He nodded, accepting the explanation. But unease lingered. Days passed. The feeling returned again during dinner when Emily suddenly stopped mid-sentence, closing her eyes briefly as if steadying herself. "You sure you're all right?" he asked. She smiled immediately. "I'm fine. Just didn't sleep much last night." The answer sounded practiced. He recognized that tone. It was the same tone he once used when hiding stress during their marriage. The realization unsettled him more than he expected. Later that evening, while cleaning toys after bedtime, Gerald noticed unopened envelopes stacked neatly near the counter. Medical logos printed across the corners. He didn't touch them, didn't ask immediately. Respect mattered, but concern settled deeper inside him. When Emily returned from putting the twins to sleep, he spoke gently. "You've been going to the doctor a lot?" She froze almost imperceptibly, then continued wiping the counter. "Just routine stuff." The answer came too quickly. He waited. Silence stretched between them, not confrontational, just patient. Finally, he said quietly, "Emily, you don't have to handle everything alone anymore." Her shoulders lowered slightly. For a moment, she looked tired in a way she rarely allowed anyone to see. "I know," she said softly. But she didn't continue. The truth arrived days later. Gerald came by earlier than expected, planning to take the twins for ice cream. The apartment was unusually quiet when Emily opened the door. Her smile appeared, but weaker. "You're early. Meeting ended sooner," he said. "Thought I'd surprise them. They're napping." He nodded, stepping inside. That was when he noticed her hands trembling slightly as she poured water into a glass. Concern replaced hesitation. "Emily," he said gently, "what's going on?" She leaned against the counter, eyes lowering. For several seconds she said nothing. The silence felt heavier than any argument they had ever shared. Finally, she exhaled slowly. "I didn't want this to change things," she admitted. His chest tightened. "Change what?" "The progress we've made. The peace the kids feel." He stepped closer, voice calm but firm. "You're scaring me." She nodded faintly. "I was diagnosed with a heart condition last year," she said quietly. The words landed softly, yet everything shifted. Gerald blinked, unsure he heard correctly. Heart condition?" She nodded. "After the twins were born, I started having episodes. Dizziness, exhaustion, chest pain sometimes. Doctors say it's manageable, but stress makes it worse." He stared at her, absorbing each sentence slowly. "For how long?" he asked. "Almost a year." The room felt smaller. "A year?" His voice lowered, disbelief mixing with hurt. "And you never told me?" Emily met his eyes calmly. "We weren't us yet. You had just come back into their lives. I didn't want you feeling obligated." "I am obligated," he said quietly. "I care about you." "I know," she replied gently. "That's exactly why I waited." He paced slowly, emotions colliding. Fear, guilt, frustration at time already lost. "You've been handling this alone?" She shook her head slightly. "Not alone, just privately." He stopped. "That's not the same thing." She didn't argue, because she knew he was right. "I learned how to manage," she said softly. "Medication, rest when I can. Most days are fine." "Most days?" he repeated. She offered a small smile meant to reassure. "I'm still here, Gerald." The simplicity of the statement struck him deeply. Still here, as if survival itself required explanation. He sat down slowly, voice quieter now. "Why didn't you trust me with this?" Emily hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because the last time life became overwhelming, we lost each other." The truth settled between them without accusation. She continued gently. I didn't want illness to become another pressure that pushed you away. Gerald felt the weight of past mistakes pressing against the present. I'm not that man anymore, he said. I know, she replied softly, but healing takes time for both of us. Silence followed. Not painful, just real. Outside, children laughed somewhere down the street. Life continued normally while their world adjusted quietly. Gerald finally spoke, voice steady but emotional. You don't have to be strong all the time. Emily smiled faintly. I'm not trying to be strong. I'm trying to be stable for them. He understood immediately. Every decision she made centered on Mia and Liam. Her strength wasn't pride. It was love. And in that realization, something shifted inside him again. For years, he believed he needed to rescue situations, fix problems, provide solutions. But standing there now, he understood something different. Emily had already saved herself, saved their children, built a life without waiting for rescue. And somehow, her resilience was teaching him how to become better too. He reached for her hand carefully. I'm here, he said quietly. Not to fix everything, just to stand with you. She squeezed his hand gently. That's all I need. For the first time, vulnerability flowed both ways. Not one person saving the other, but two people learning how to carry weight together. The stakes between them shifted subtly in that moment. This was no longer just about rebuilding love. It was about protecting life itself. And love, when faced with fragility, often becomes clearer than ever before. Later, after the twins woke and filled the apartment with laughter again, Gerald watched Emily carefully, noticing both her strength and her limits. He understood now. She wasn't waiting to be rescued. She had been surviving long before he returned. And the greatest change happening wasn't Emily becoming stronger. It was Gerald learning humility, learning that belonging sometimes means supporting someone who already knows how to stand. Hope remained. But now it carried urgency, because love had moved beyond romance, into survival. Some warnings arrived quietly, not loud enough to stop life, just persistent enough to be ignored until ignoring them is no longer possible. For weeks after Emily revealed her condition, life continued almost normally. Gerald adjusted his schedule, spending more evenings at the apartment. He learned medication times, noticed when fatigue settled into her posture, gently taking over tasks without announcing concern. Emily accepted help carefully, not as surrender, as balance. The twins remained the center of everything, their laughter filling spaces where worry tried to grow. Mia insisted on dance parties before bedtime. Liam developed a new habit of sitting beside Gerald while stacking blocks in focused silence. Routine became comfort, and comfort made danger harder to recognize. The first real sign came on a Tuesday afternoon. Emily stood in the kitchen preparing lunch while Gerald helped Liam assemble a puzzle nearby. Sunlight filtered softly through the window, ordinary peace settling over the room. Then a glass slipped from Emily's hand. It shattered against the floor. Both Gerald and Liam looked up instantly. Emily stood frozen, one hand gripping the counter. You okay? Gerald asked, already rising. She nodded quickly. Just dizzy for a second. Her smile arrived too fast, too practiced. He stepped closer anyway. You should sit. I'm fine, she insisted, brushing it off. Probably didn't eat enough. She moved to clean the glass before he could protest. Life resumed. But Gerald noticed how she leaned slightly against the counter afterward, how her breathing took longer to steady. A quiet unease settled inside him. Over the next few days, small moments repeated, Emily pausing halfway up the stairs, closing her eyes briefly during conversations, choosing to sit instead of standing while helping the twins with activities. Each time she reassured him. Each time he wanted to believe her. Because fear, once acknowledged, changes everything. Friday evening arrived warm and calm. They decided on a simple night at home. Takeout food, cartoons playing softly, while Mia narrated every scene dramatically, and Liam corrected her with serious logic. Gerald watched Emily across the room. She laughed. She smiled. Yet exhaustion lingered beneath both. He walked over quietly. You should rest, he said. In a minute, she replied. I like watching them. The twins' laughter echoed between them. For a moment, everything felt perfectly ordinary, and then Emily's smile faded. Her hand moved instinctively to her chest. She inhaled sharply. Gerald noticed immediately. Emily! She didn't answer. Her knees weakened slightly as she reached for the back of the couch. Time fractured. He crossed the room instantly, catching her before she fell completely. Hey, look at me. Her breathing came shallow, uneven. I'm okay, she whispered, though her voice trembled. She wasn't. Mia stopped laughing. Liam stood frozen, confusion replacing calm. Gerald felt fear surge through him, raw, unfamiliar, uncontrollable. "We're going to the hospital," he said firmly. "No, wait, it'll pass," she murmured weakly. He shook his head. "No." The certainty in his voice surprised even him. Minutes blurred. He gathered keys, spoke calmly to the twins despite panic pressing against his chest, helped Emily toward the car while reassuring her with quiet words he barely remembered saying. Traffic lights felt too slow. Every red light stretched unbearably long. He kept glancing at her. "Stay with me," he whispered. "I'm here," she answered faintly. But her eyes closed longer between responses. Fear tightened his grip on the steering wheel. For years Gerald believed control defined strength. Now he understood how powerless love could make a person feel. Hospital doors opened automatically as he rushed inside, calling for help before reaching the desk. Nurses moved quickly, guiding Emily onto a wheelchair, asking questions he struggled to answer clearly. How long has she had symptoms? What medications? Any prior episodes? Gerald followed, heart pounding, realizing how many details he still didn't know. The twins sat quietly beside him moments later, unusually still, sensing seriousness without explanation. Mia held his sleeve tightly. "Mommy okay?" she asked. He swallowed hard. "She's strong," he said softly. The words sounded hopeful, but fear lived underneath them. Waiting rooms stretch time differently. Minutes feel heavier. Thoughts grow louder. Gerald sat between Mia and Liam, one arm around each child while monitors beeped faintly beyond closed doors. He replayed everything, every moment he missed, every year he wasn't there, every sign he might have overlooked recently. Regret returned, but this time it carried urgency instead of reflection. He wasn't afraid of losing the past anymore. He was afraid of losing the present. A nurse approached eventually. "She's stable," the nurse said gently. "Doctors are running tests." Relief arrived incomplete. Stable did not mean safe. Hours passed before Gerald was allowed into the room. Emily lay resting, pale but conscious. Machines hummed softly around her. Seeing her there, vulnerable still, shook him deeply. He pulled a chair close, sitting quietly before speaking. "You scared me," he admitted. She managed a faint smile. "I scared myself too." Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just honest. "I thought I had it under control," she said quietly. "You don't have to control everything," he replied, voice softer than he intended. Her eyes met his. "I had to, for a long time," he nodded slowly, understanding replacing frustration. For years she survived by carrying everything alone. Letting go of that habit wouldn't happen overnight. He reached for her hand carefully. "I'm here," he said again. This time the words sounded different. Not reassurance, commitment. Emily squeezed his fingers weakly. "I know." Outside the room, Mia and Liam waited with quiet patience, unaware that their world had just shifted again. Inside, Gerald felt something inside him finally crack. Not strength, but illusion. Money could not prevent this moment. Success could not fix uncertainty. Love required something else entirely. Presence, humility, dependence. And as machines monitored Emily's heartbeat steadily beside him, Gerald realized the cost of love was not sacrifice alone. It was vulnerability. The willingness to admit you cannot face life by yourself anymore. The night stretched long. Gerald didn't leave her side, because for the first time he understood clearly. Strength sometimes breaks, not to end a story, but to force people to rebuild it together. Hospitals change the way people think. Time slows there, not gently but deliberately, forcing reflection whether a person is ready or not. Gerald had never spent a full night sitting beside a hospital bed before. Business crises once felt urgent, sleepless nights once felt productive, but this kind of waiting carried no achievement at the end of it. Only uncertainty. Machines hummed softly while dim hallway lights slipped through the partially open door. Emily slept intermittently, doctors satisfied enough with her stability to allow rest, though more tests waited in the morning. Gerald remained awake, not because he had to, because leaving felt impossible. He sat forward, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped tightly as thoughts moved through him without order. For years he believed responsibility meant solving problems quickly. Now there was nothing to solve. Only someone he loved, vulnerable in ways money could not change, and the realization unsettled him deeply. Near midnight, Emily stirred slightly. "You should go home," she murmured, voice faint. He shook his head immediately. "I'm not going anywhere." She opened her eyes halfway, studying him. "You've been here all night. I want to be." A small silence followed. She understood the difference between obligation and choice. Still, habit made her protest gently. "The kids are with someone from your building," he said softly. "They're safe. I checked twice." Emily nodded, reassured. Then she noticed something else. He looked tired, but not physically, emotionally exposed. "What are you thinking about?" she asked quietly. Gerald hesitated. For once, words didn't come easily. Finally, he exhaled. I'm realizing how much I still don't know how to do. She frowned slightly. What do you mean? I know how to build companies, he said. I know how to recover from failure, negotiate deals, manage risk. But sitting here tonight... He paused, searching for honesty. I don't know how to carry fear like this. Emily watched him carefully, because Gerald rarely admitted uncertainty. Morning arrived slowly. Doctors spoke in calm, professional tones. Adjustments to medication, stress management, careful monitoring moving forward. Nothing catastrophic, but nothing minor either. Recovery required consistency, support, reduced strain. Gerald listened closely, absorbing every instruction as if memorization alone could protect her. When the doctors left, silence returned. Emily looked toward the window. I hate feeling fragile, she admitted softly. You're not fragile, he replied. She smiled faintly. My body disagrees. He didn't argue. Instead, he sat beside her, thoughtful. Something inside him had shifted overnight, not sudden clarity, but acceptance of a truth he avoided most of his life. He could not do this alone, and neither could she. Later that afternoon, after Emily rested again, Gerald stepped into the hallway. He leaned against the wall, breathing deeply. For the first time since childhood, he felt overwhelmed without knowing how to fix it. His phone buzzed repeatedly. Work messages, requests, decisions waiting for answers. He silenced it. None of it mattered right now. He stared down the hallway, watching nurses move calmly between rooms, families sitting together quietly, strangers supporting each other without hesitation. And suddenly, he understood something he had resisted for years. Strength was not independence. Strength was connection. The realization felt humbling, almost frightening, because it required admitting need. He returned to Emily's room slowly. She was awake, watching him. You look like you figured something out, she said gently. He sat beside her. I did. She waited. Gerald swallowed, emotion visible now, not hidden behind composure or confidence. I spent most of my life believing I had to be the strong one, he said. The provider, the problem solver, the person who never needed help. Emily listened quietly, and when things got hard before, I pulled away because I thought protecting you meant handling everything alone. Her expression softened. He continued, voice steady but vulnerable. I see now that wasn't strength. That was fear. Silence settled gently between them. Then he said words that felt heavier than any business decision he had ever made. Emily, I need your help. She blinked slightly, surprised not by the request, but by the humility behind it. My help? She asked. Yes, he said. I don't know how to do this perfectly. I don't know how to be the father they deserve without learning from you. I don't know how to support you without understanding what you actually need instead of assuming. His voice softened further. And I don't want to lose this family because I'm too proud to admit I need partnership. The room grew very still. This was not apology, not guilt, transformation. Years earlier, those words might have sounded like weakness to him. Now they sounded like growth. Help isn't something you beg for, she said gently. It's something people share. He nodded slowly. I'm ready to share it. She reached for his hand. I never needed you to save me, she said. I just needed you beside me. I understand that now. And he truly did. For the first time, Gerald wasn't trying to lead, fix, or compensate. He was choosing partnership. Later that evening, Mia and Liam visited briefly, their presence filling the hospital room with energy strong enough to soften fear. Mia climbed carefully onto the bed beside Emily, whispering dramatically as if hospitals required secrecy. Liam handed Gerald the toy truck again, a silent ritual now familiar. Gerald accepted it with a smile. Something felt different inside him. Not pressure, belonging, real belonging, the kind earned through vulnerability rather than achievement. After the twins left, Emily looked at him thoughtfully. You know, she said quietly, you didn't fail before. He frowned slightly. I thought I did. No, she replied. You just didn't know how to ask yet. He considered that. Years of success had taught him how to give orders, offer solutions, provide answers. But asking, truly asking, required trust, and trust required humility. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm learning, she smiled. That's all any of us are doing. Outside, evening settled across Atlanta again. Inside the hospital room, fear still existed. Uncertainty still waited. But something stronger had taken root between them. Not romance alone. Partnership. Because the moment a man learns to ask for help without shame is often the moment he finally becomes strong enough to love fully. Recovery did not happen overnight. Life rarely rewards people with instant healing after emotional breakthroughs. Instead, progress arrived quietly, measured in ordinary days that slowly rebuilt stability. Emily returned home after several days in the hospital, moving carefully but determined to resume normal life. The apartment felt warmer the moment she stepped inside, Mia and Liam racing toward her with the unstoppable energy only children possess. "Mommy home," Mia shouted, wrapping her arms tightly around Emily's waist. Liam followed more gently, pressing close as if confirming she was truly there. Emily knelt slowly, holding them both, eyes closing briefly as relief settled deep inside her chest. Gerald stood nearby, watching, not as a visitor anymore, as part of the moment, and he understood something quietly profound. Love was no longer about reclaiming what they once had. It was about protecting what existed now. The weeks that followed reshaped everyone's rhythm. Gerald reorganized his company leadership, delegating responsibilities he once refused to release. Meetings ended earlier. Weekends became sacred space instead of optional rest. Success no longer defined his priorities, presence did. Mornings sometimes began with school preparations instead of conference calls. He learned which cereal Liam preferred, and how Mia required music playing while brushing her teeth, or she refused cooperation entirely. Small details became victories. Emily noticed the change not through grand gestures but consistency. Groceries already stocked, medication reminders spoken gently rather than anxiously, laughter returning without effort. One evening she watched Gerald helping Liam tie his shoes, patience replacing urgency. "You're getting good at this," she said from across the room. Gerald smiled faintly. "I've had excellent teachers," Mia overheard immediately. "That me, yes," he laughed. "Definitely you." Yet healing also brought reflection. One quiet night after the twins slept, Emily and Gerald sat together on the balcony, city lights stretching endlessly before them. Atlanta moved below, cars passing, distant music drifting through warm air, life continuing in steady rhythm. Emily spoke first. "You know what surprised me most about all this?" "What?" "That happiness feels calmer now." He nodded slowly. "We stopped trying to make life perfect," he said. "We just started living it honestly." She leaned back, thoughtful. "For a long time I thought love meant never falling apart, and now," she smiled softly, "now I think love means choosing each other after you understand exactly how fragile everything is." The truth settled gently between them. A few weeks later, Gerald suggested a family picnic at the same park where their lives had collided again months earlier. Emily raised an eyebrow knowingly. "Full circle moment?" "Maybe," he admitted. The twins ran ahead across familiar grass while Gerald unpacked food awkwardly, struggling with blankets that refused cooperation. Emily laughed, watching him. "You still overthink simple things." "I prefer strategic preparation," he defended. Mia interrupted loudly. "Bubbles." And suddenly the park filled again with laughter. Echoes of the day everything changed. Gerald watched Emily standing in sunlight, calm strength visible in every movement, despite ongoing recovery. Gratitude filled him quietly. He reached into his jacket pocket. Not nervously, carefully. When the twins wandered a short distance away chasing bubbles, Gerald turned toward Emily. "I've been thinking about something," he said. She studied him curiously. "That usually means trouble." He smiled. "No trouble, just honesty." He pulled out a small box. Emily exhaled slowly, already understanding. "Gerald." He shook his head gently before she could continue. "This isn't about fixing the past," he said, "and it's not about promises I don't understand yet." He opened the box, revealing a simple ring, elegant, understated. "I asked you once for a perfect life," he continued softly. "Now I know perfect doesn't exist. What I want is real. Every complicated, beautiful, uncertain part of it." Emotion filled her eyes. "With you," he added, voice steady. "With Mia and Liam. With all the lessons we learned the hard way." He didn't kneel immediately. Instead, he waited, giving her space to feel rather than react. "I don't want to rescue you," he said quietly. "I want to walk beside you." Silence stretched gently between them. Emily laughed softly through tears. "You finally understand. I'm trying to—" She looked toward the twins, laughing in the distance, then back at him. "Yes," she said, "not because history demanded it, because growth made it possible." Gerald exhaled, relief and gratitude blending into one quiet moment as he slipped the ring onto her finger. No crowd applauded. No dramatic music played. 1 year later, the community arts center Emily once dreamed about opened its doors. Children filled rooms with color and creativity. Music echoed through hallways alive with possibility. Families gathered, conversations overlapping warmly. Emily stood near the entrance watching everything unfold, pride and disbelief mixing gently. Gerald struggled nearby, assembling chairs incorrectly while Mia attempted to supervise. and Liam inspected everything seriously. "You're doing it wrong," Mia declared. "I'm aware," Gerald replied calmly. Emily laughed, shaking her head. Life looked different than either of them imagined years earlier. Harder, richer, real. She walked toward Gerald, slipping her hand into his. "We built this together," he said quietly. She shook her head with a smile. "No. We learned how to build together, and that made all the difference." As evening settled and families filled the space with joy, the narrator's voice lingers gently, not to explain the ending, but to leave a question where reflection begins. Because love rarely asks whether you deserve a second chance. It asks whether you are willing to grow into the person that chance requires. So before this story ends, take a moment. If love returned to your life, changed, imperfect, asking more honesty than before, would you recognize it? Would you protect it differently? Would you choose humility over pride? Because sometimes the greatest transformation isn't finding love again. It's becoming the person love needed all along. If this story touched you, take a second to like, share, and tell us in the comments what moment stayed with you most. Your voice helps stories like this reach someone who might need hope tonight. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Mr. Dave's Stories, where every story reminds us that growth is possible, healing is real, and lessons are everywhere. When love returns, are you brave enough to become the person it needed all along?